Nobody warned Adaeze that Tuesday would be the last ordinary day she would ever have. She was behind the counter of a small café in central Seoul, steaming milk, keeping her head down the way she had trained herself to do for 15 years. Then the front door opened, and it didn't open the way a customer enters. It opened the way a warning does. 4 men in dark suits stepped in first. They moved slowly, scanning every table, every face, every exit. Conversations died mid-sentence. A woman near the window set her cup down and did not pick it up again. The barista beside Adaeze stepped back without knowing why. Then he walked in. Adrian Vasile. Adaeze's hand locked around the steamer handle. Her chest tightened into something that was not quite breathing. She knew that face. That jaw. That deliberate, unhurried walk. Those still gray eyes that had once looked at her like she was the only honest thing in his world. 15 years. 5 cities. 15 years of silence, sacrifice, and one secret she had protected above everything else in her life. He was older. Harder. He moved through the room like a man gravity respected slightly more than it respected other people. He had not seen her yet. But her son had already seen him. Leo was 15 years old, sitting at the corner table with his school textbooks open in front of him. He had pulled out one earphone. And he was studying the stranger with that particular focused stillness he used when something genuinely puzzled him. Then Leo turned slowly toward his mother. "Mom, why does that man have my eyes?" The room went completely still. And 15 years of carefully kept silence began to collapse. Adaeze did not answer her son. She couldn't. Every sentence she had quietly rehearsed for this moment across 15 years of sleepless nights abandoned her completely now. She looked at Leo and felt the full weight of what she was carrying arrive all at once. What she did not know, what she would only understand much later, was that Leo had not asked that question by accident. He had not simply looked up from his textbooks and noticed a stranger. Leo had been asking that question to himself for years. He had noticed the absence of a father long before most children begin to form that specific kind of confusion. He had studied his own face in mirrors with more focus than teenagers usually do. He had noticed the gray eyes that no one in his mother's family shared. He had asked his mother twice over the years, and both times she had given him the kind of gentle, non-answer that told him the real answer was somewhere she could not yet bring herself to go. So Leo had looked on his own. He had researched carefully, late evenings on his phone when Adaeze thought he was asleep. Powerful men in Seoul. Criminal figures. Men whose names appeared in careful, vague language in news articles that never said quite enough. He was looking for something he couldn't name. A face that matched the one in his mirror. He had never found it online. Until a man walked through a cafe door on a Tuesday afternoon. And Leo had recognized him immediately. Not with shock. With the quiet, certain calm of someone who has always suspected the truth and has just been handed the final piece that makes everything make sense. He was waiting for his mother to confirm what he already knew. 15 years earlier, Adaeze Okonkwo was 22 years old and quietly terrified. Not in the kind of way that shows. In the deep, private way that comes from arriving in a foreign country with one suitcase, a scholarship letter, and the full weight of your family's hope pressed into your chest. Seoul was enormous and fast and cold in a way Lagos never was. The language came in sounds she couldn't yet separate into words. The trains required a focused attention she hadn't yet built. The food was unfamiliar. The winters were sharper than anything she had prepared for. For the first 3 weeks, she cried quietly every night after her dormitory roommate fell asleep, missing her mother's voice, the smell of her grandmother's cooking, the particular sound of Lagos at night. But she did not quit. Quitting was not something Adaeze's body knew how to do. Her mother had worked 2 jobs for years without complaint. Her father had saved carefully so that her school fees never missed a single week. She had been handed an opportunity that her entire family had bent themselves around making possible. She was not going to waste it. She learned the language piece by piece. She studied when others slept. She showed up to every lecture, every clinical shift, every skills assessment with everything she had. Her supervisors noticed. Her peers noticed. Patients noticed the way she slowed down near the difficult ones, the frightened, the lonely, the ones who needed someone to simply stay. She had no way of knowing that the night her life would change forever was already approaching. It arrived on a stormy Wednesday. At a side door no one was supposed to use. It was past midnight when the side entrance of the hospital flew open. Adaeze was at the nurse's station finishing a patient chart when she heard it. Heavy footsteps. Low, urgent voices. The particular sound of something being carried quickly through a corridor not designed for urgency. She was on her feet before she had consciously decided to move. Two large men moved a third through the hallway with the practiced speed of people who had done this before and had a specific destination in mind. No ambulance. No admissions paperwork. No explanation offered at the front desk. The man between them was conscious but barely. His shirt was soaked through with blood. His breathing was the tight, deliberate kind of a person using every ounce of focus to keep from losing it entirely. Gunshot wounds. She could see two. One deep in his left side. One across the shoulder. The senior nurse on duty appeared, assessed the situation with a single long look, and quietly redirected the nearest available doctor. No questions about police documentation. No official registration. Just clean, careful, completely off-record medical care. Adaeze was assigned to the room without being told why. She understood well enough. She went in. Assessed the damage. Stabilized him the way she had been trained. He was in significant pain but made no sound at all. His jaw was clenched. His gray eyes tracked every movement she made with the steady, evaluating calm of a man who trusted no one automatically. Tall. Dark-haired. Still as a held breath. She didn't know his name. She didn't know that learning it would cost her 15 years of her life. By morning, the whole hospital knew, without anyone saying a word. The men stationed outside room 7. The way the department head kept appearing in the corridor with that specific expression that said he was not worried about the patient but about something much larger. The careful way each nurse accepted reassignment without asking why. Everyone gave that room a wide distance. Everyone except Adaeze. She hadn't been reassigned. Her supervisor had simply overlooked it, and correcting it now would have drawn more attention than leaving it alone. So Adaeze kept going back. She checked vitals, changed dressings, and monitored his recovery the way she had been trained, professionally, without hesitation, without allowing the weight of who he might be to change how she did her job. Adrian Vasile watched her. Not with threat. Not with the calculating look he used on everyone else. Something different. Genuine curiosity. She moved near him without holding her breath. She leaned in to examine the wound site without slowing down. She spoke to him the way she spoke to every patient, directly and without performance. On the second morning, he spoke. "You're not scared of me." Not a question. A statement. Delivered with the quiet surprise of a man who had not encountered this in a long time. Adaeze didn't look up from the chart. "I'm a nurse. My job is to help people who need it. You need it. That's all this is." A pause. "Most people aren't like that," he said. She looked at him directly. "Then most people are missing the point." He said nothing after that. But the next morning when she arrived, he was sitting up straighter. And he was watching the door less. He was watching her instead. Adrian's recovery stretched into a third week. Then a fourth. His wounds healed. But he didn't leave. His men had arranged for an extended private stay, framed as medical necessity. Adaeze understood it wasn't. She kept coming back anyway. She told herself it was routine. But somewhere in those quiet hospital nights, the conversations started growing longer. And routine stopped being honest. He asked her things no one in her program had ever thought to ask. What leaving Lagos felt like. What her mother's face looked like the morning the scholarship phone call came. What she wanted her life to look like when the studying was finally behind her. She answered carefully at first. Then more openly. Because he listened differently than most people. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't wait for his turn to speak. He listened with the focused attention of someone hungry for something honest. In return, she asked things no one had probably dared to ask him in years. He told her the truth. He had grown up in a city where violence was the first language anyone learned. His father ran with dangerous men. His older brother had disappeared before Adrian turned 14. He had survived by becoming what others feared, because fear was the only reliable shelter he had ever found. He said it plainly. Without self-pity or drama. Adaeze sat with those words long after her shifts ended. She had come to Seoul to become a nurse. She had not come to find a lonely man hidden inside a feared one. But that was what she had found. And the more she found, the harder it became to simply walk away at the end of each night. While Adrian recovered in room 7, someone on the other side of the city was watching very carefully. Seoul did not operate with noise. He was not the kind of man who announced himself or made threats in rooms full of witnesses. He was the kind of man who sat in a quiet office, collected information patiently, and waited for the exact right moment before he moved. He and Adrian Vasile had maintained a cold, careful distance for years. Neither man had moved directly against the other because both understood that open conflict was expensive and unpredictable. The balance between them was delicate, two forces holding each other still through the weight of what each one knew about the other. But Seoul was not interested in balance. He was interested in winning. He understood something most men in the criminal world missed. The fastest way to destroy a powerful man is not to attack his operation. It is to find the thing inside him that power cannot harden. Every man has one. Even the ones who appear completely sealed. Adrian Vasile had always appeared fully sealed. Until the hospital stay. Seoul's informant reported the nurse. The young woman who entered room 7 without hesitation. Who stayed longer than her schedule required. Who was there by choice when everyone else had manufactured a reason to stay away. Seoul received the report and read it twice. Then he made a decision that he did not share with anyone in that room. He was going to handle this particular piece himself. Personally. What grew between Adaeze and Adrian was real. That was the problem. She had known the risks from the beginning. She wasn't naive. She had seen enough to understand clearly what his world looked like from the outside. The guarded men. The off-record hospital admission. The quiet deference from senior staff who clearly understood that normal rules did not apply to this particular patient. She understood all of it. And she had still called the number he gave her. What followed was careful and slow. Private meetings in quiet places far from anyone connected to his world. Late afternoon walks along the river. A restaurant in a district where no one knew either of them. He came without his men on those days, or with just one, standing at a distance that preserved the feeling of something private. He was different outside the hospital. Less guarded. He asked her about her faith, about what kept her grounded in a city so far from home, about whether she ever regretted leaving Lagos. He listened to her answers like a man collecting something valuable. She asked him whether he ever wanted a different life. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't think that was an option for me." She didn't push. But she noticed that he said didn't, past tense. As if something had recently shifted the boundary of what he believed was possible. She told herself not to read too much into it. But something real was building between them. Something neither of them had a safe word for. And real things, she was about to learn, attract exactly the kind of attention that destroys them. The knock came on a Thursday evening. Adaeze had just returned from a shift. She opened her apartment door expecting nothing, and found a man she did not recognize standing in the hallway with the kind of stillness that made every instinct in her body stand up at once. He was well-dressed. Calm. The type of calm that doesn't come from peace, it comes from never being afraid of consequences. "My name is Seoul Beck," he said. "You don't know me. But I know a great deal about you." He didn't push his way in. He simply stood in the doorway and spoke quietly, as if they were discussing something ordinary. His voice was even. Measured. Which made everything he said feel more dangerous, not less. He told her he had been watching her relationship with Adrien Vasile. He told her he had no interest in harming her, she was simply a young woman from another country who had gotten involved in something she didn't understand. He told her he bore her no ill will. Then he said the words that changed everything. "If Adrien Vasile ever has a child, that child will be the first thing I destroy." He held her gaze while he said it. Not with anger. With the flat, certain delivery of a man stating a fact he had already decided. "Leave Seoul. Don't tell him where you're going. If you stay, the child pays for it." He straightened his jacket, nodded once, and walked back down the hallway. Adaeze stood at her open door for a long time after he disappeared around the corner. Her hand was already resting on her stomach. Because she had known for 4 days. She had taken the test 4 days before Seoul Beck appeared at her door. 2 lines. The kind of result that rearranges the entire architecture of what you believed your life was going to look like. She had sat on the edge of the bathroom sink at 5 in the morning and held the test in both hands and said nothing. Outside, Seoul carried on exactly as it always had, a delivery truck moving through the street below, the first light arriving gray and slow over the rooftops. Nothing in the world had changed. Everything inside that bathroom had. She had spent those 4 days thinking. Turning the situation over carefully the way she handled complex clinical problems, examining every side, every implication, every possible outcome. She was a nursing student. She understood that emotion and analysis were both necessary, but analysis had to come first. The analysis was not comforting. Adrien's world was not safe for a child. She had understood that generally for months. But general understanding and specific knowledge are entirely different things. She had not yet known exactly how specific the danger was. Then Seoul Beck knocked on her door and removed every remaining uncertainty. "If Adrien ever has a child, that child will be the first thing I destroy." She pressed both hands flat against her stomach now. Not dramatically. Just a quiet, grounding pressure against something that had suddenly become the most important thing in her world. Her baby was not yet 6 weeks old. And the most dangerous man in Seoul already had a plan for it. She had one choice. And it was going to cost her everything. She did not say goodbye. She had planned to find a way. 3 days she spent turning over the idea of some explanation, partial truth, carefully worded, enough to make her disappearance make sense without exposing why she was really going. But every version ended the same. Adrian stopping her. His men tracking her movements. Seoul back hearing that she had spoken before she reached safety. Silence was the only option that kept the child safe. On a Friday night, while the city was loud enough to cover movement, Adaeze packed one bag. Documents. 2 weeks of clothing. Every one she had saved over 18 months. She left her apartment key on the kitchen counter. She left her university ID. She left the phone Adrian had given her, switched off, placed on the table beside it. She did not look at it for long. She took the last train south. Then a connecting bus to a coastal city she had selected for exactly one reason. Nobody from Adrian's world had any reason to look there. She found a room above a laundry shop, paid 3 months in cash, and gave a name that was not her own. She called her mother once from a payphone. Just enough to say she was alive. Not enough to say where. She was 22 years old. Alone. Pregnant. Running from the man she had not stopped loving, from a threat she had not invited, from a world she had stumbled into simply by doing her job one stormy night. But her child was safe. That thought was the only thing that made her keep breathing. Leo was born on a Tuesday morning in March. In a quiet hospital in a city that had never heard of Adrian Vasile. Adaeze was alone. A patient midwife talked her through the long hours without making her feel like a burden. When it was over and the nurse placed the baby in her arms, Adaeze looked at his face for a long time without speaking. Then she whispered his name. Leo. It meant lion. She needed him to grow up strong. The years that followed were not easy. But they were full. She worked healthcare administration, café shifts, hospital cleaning when nothing else was open. She moved twice as Leo grew, not because of any specific threat, but because stillness made her nervous. She had trained herself to keep moving. She raised him the way her own parents had raised her. Discipline and tenderness in equal measure. She taught him Igbo words alongside Korean. She told him stories from Lagos, about a grandmother who prayed every morning before sunrise, about a grandfather who had never missed a single school event. She gave him strong roots even when they had no permanent ground to plant them in. Leo grew into a serious, thoughtful teenager with an obsession for architectural design and a focused quality that adults consistently noticed and found difficult to name. He asked about his father. Not often. But carefully. The way he asked all important questions, fully present, waiting for a real answer. Each time, Adaeze chose her words with care. And each time, she felt the full weight of what she was still carrying. She always told herself she would find the right moment to tell him the truth. She was still waiting for it. Leo turned 10. Then 12. Then 15. And with every year that passed, one thing became harder for Adaeze to pretend she wasn't seeing. His eyes. They had settled into a deep, still gray. The kind that carries weight in a face even when the expression is relaxed. The kind that made adults slow down when they first looked at him, not sure why, only aware of something serious behind them that didn't match his age. They were Adrian Vasile's eyes. Completely. Adaeze knew every shift in those eyes. She had spent months in close proximity to them 15 years ago and she had never fully stopped seeing them. And now they looked up at her from her son's face every single morning. Leo knew something was unusual too. He had looked at his own reflection with the focused curiosity of a young architect examining something that didn't line up. He had looked at photos of his mother's family online and found no match. He had asked her once, at age 12, whether his father had gray eyes. She had said she didn't know. He had looked at her quietly for a moment, the way Leo always looked at things he didn't fully believe, and then returned to whatever he had been drawing. But he hadn't stopped looking. He had simply become more careful about how he looked. Evenings on his phone. Articles about powerful figures in the Seoul criminal world. He was building something in his mind the way he built architectural designs, piece by piece, until the shape of the whole thing became clear. He hadn't found the final piece yet. He found it on a Tuesday afternoon, when a man walked through a cafe door. Adrian cleared the cafe quietly and efficiently. A word to his lead man. Staff and customers directed outside with polite firmness. Front door locked. Then it was the three of them. Adaeze had come from behind the counter. She stood straight. 15 years had not made her smaller. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she had not expected. "I looked for you." The words landed differently than anything else he could have said. "For 3 years after you disappeared, I had people searching. I thought Seoul had taken you. I thought you were dead." His voice was controlled, but something underneath it was not. "I spent years believing my enemies had killed you because of what you meant to me." Adaeze stood very still. She had imagined many versions of this confrontation over 15 years. In none of them had she allowed herself to consider that he had grieved her. That he had carried his own kind of loss across all the same years she had been carrying hers. "I didn't know you searched," she said quietly. "I know." He held her gaze. That was the point of disappearing. A silence stretched between them. Not cold. The kind of silence that contains more than words can hold. "How old is he?" Adrian asked. 15. The number moved across his face like weather. 15 years of searching. 15 years of grief. And the person he had been mourning had been alive the entire time, raising his son in a city he had never thought to look in. "Why?" he said. Adaeze took a breath. "Because Seoul came to my apartment," she said. "Personally." The room went very quiet. Adrian's expression changed in a way Adaeze had never seen before. Something cold and focused moved into his eyes, not at her, but at a name. She told him everything. The knock on her door. Seoul standing calm in her hallway, well-dressed, unhurried. The exact words he had used. "If Adrian Vasile ever has a child, that child will be the first thing I destroy." "I had already been carrying the pregnancy for 4 days when you came," she said. "I hadn't told you yet. I hadn't told anyone." He couldn't have known for certain. But he was warning me in advance. Covering every possibility. Adrian said nothing. She watched him process what she was saying, not just the fact of it, but everything it meant. Seoul had approached her directly. Had accessed her address. Had moved against her personally while Adrian was still in hospital, still recovering, still believing she was safe. "He knew about us before I was even discharged," Adrian said. Not a question. "Yes." Another silence. Then Leo's voice came from across the room. "I knew." They both turned. Leo had been standing quietly near the wall during the full conversation. Not hiding. Just waiting, the way he always waited for the right moment. "I didn't know his name," Leo continued carefully. "But I knew there was a man behind why we kept moving. I've been researching for 2 years. He looked at Adrian steadily. "I recognized your face the moment you walked in. I wasn't asking Mom an innocent question." He paused. "I was asking her to finally confirm the truth." Nobody spoke for a moment. The weight of what Leo had just said settled over the room like the first quiet after a storm. Adaeze looked at her son. She had known he was perceptive. She had raised him to observe carefully and think before speaking. She had not known, not fully, how deeply he had been carrying this on his own. Adrian looked at the boy standing across the room. 15 years old. Nearly his height. Those gray eyes steady and direct, holding his gaze without flinching. A teenager who had done his own quiet investigation into his own origins, come to his own conclusions, and delivered his confirmation calmly in front of both parents without breaking his composure. Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Not the cold authority he wore like armor. Something beneath it. Something that had been sealed for a very long time and was only now finding air. He crossed the room and crouched slightly so he was closer to Leo's eye level. He looked at his son the way a man looks at something he cannot fully believe he is allowed to see. "I didn't know about you," he said. "If I had, you would have come," Leo said. Flat. Honest. Not accusing, just accurate. "Yes." And Cheol Beck would have had exactly what he wanted, Leo replied quietly. Adrian stopped. He looked at this 15-year-old who had just defended his mother's 15-year decision with a single sentence. He looked at Adaeze. She had not run out of fear. She had not run out of anger. She had run because she understood the danger more clearly than anyone had given her credit for. And she had been right. Leo was not finished. He had given Adrian the truth. He had defended his mother's choice. But there was one more thing he needed to say, and he had been waiting his entire life to say it. "I want to ask you something," Leo said. Adrian nodded. "Where were you for 15 years? The question was not angry. It was not designed to hurt. It came out of the same calm, direct place that all of Leo's most important questions came from, a genuine need for an honest answer rather than a comfortable one. Adrian held his son's gaze for a long moment. "I wasn't here," he said. "No," Leo agreed. "You weren't." Another pause. "I know it wasn't your choice," Leo continued. "I understand what Mom did and why. I'm not angry at either of you for the situation." He looked at Adrian steadily. "But being my father going forward, that's a choice. And if you're going to make it, I need to know it's real. Not because I'm your son. Not because I carry your name or your eyes. But because you actually want to show up." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I do." "Then prove it," Leo said simply. "Over time. That's the only way." Adaeze stood across the room watching this exchange and felt something unfamiliar moving through her chest. Not relief. Not yet. Something quieter. The beginning of something she hadn't believed was possible. But something else was coming first. Because the criminal world had never needed permission to interrupt. And Cheol Beck had just received a report that changed everything. Word reached Cheol Beck by evening. His informant had been watching the café district all day. The vehicles. The cleared room. The tall teenager with the distinctive gray eyes. The length of time Adrian had stayed. The way he had walked out differently than he had walked in. Cheol Beck sat with the report in his office and thought carefully. He had known for years that Adrian Vasilei's greatest vulnerability was the absence of an heir. In the criminal world, power without succession is unstable. Men circled Adrian's operation knowing that one day it would need to transfer, and whoever controlled that transition would inherit everything Adrian had built. Now the picture was suddenly complete. A son. 15 years old. Hidden, protected, raised outside the criminal world, which in Cheol Beck's estimation made him even more valuable. An unspoiled heir. A young man whose name alone would command loyalty from everyone in Adrian's network the moment it was publicly known. Control Leo, and the empire transfers on Seoul Baek's terms. This was no longer simply about destroying Adrian. This was about acquiring everything Adrian had. He stood and moved to the window, watching the city below. The threat he had delivered to a young nurse 15 years ago had been meant to prevent exactly this moment. She had complied, had run, had hidden, had kept the child invisible. But invisible and unreachable were not the same thing. "Find the boy's school," he said. "His route home. His weekly routine." He paused. "Move quickly. Before Adrian puts proper security in place." He was not going to wait this time. It happened on a Thursday morning. Leo left for school at 7:45. Same route. Same timing. The predictable rhythm of a life that had not yet had time to build new protections around itself. Adaeze found out at 8:11 when her phone rang from an unknown number. "Your son is safe for now." The voice was measured. Patient. The voice of a man accustomed to delivering these calls without hurry. "Tell Adrian Vasile to come to the port warehouse on Woolmeadow by noon. Alone. Or the situation changes." The line cut. She called Adrian immediately. He arrived in 7 minutes. They drove to Woolmeadow together, Adrian in front with 2 of his most trusted men, Adaeze following in a second vehicle because he had not been able to talk her out of it and had stopped trying after the first 30 seconds. The warehouse was half dark when they arrived. Seoul Baek was expecting Adrian alone. He wasn't prepared for Adaeze. They found Leo in a side room, unharmed, wrists tied, school bag still on his shoulders, watching the door with quiet, patient eyes. Adrian moved toward his son. Seoul Baek moved from the shadows. He had one of Adrian's men positioned. He had timed it. In the confusion of the room, a weapon was raised at Adrian's back, and Adaeze, who had positioned herself along the far wall the moment she entered, was the only one with the angle. She picked up a steel pipe from the ground and swung it without hesitation. The man went down. Seoul Baek looked at her across the warehouse. "Still keeping him alive," he said, almost to himself. "It's what I do," she said steadily. The same words she had spoken in a hospital room 15 years ago. Seoul Baek did not walk away from that warehouse. What happened in the final moments there was not something that would be confirmed officially. But the news moved through every level of Seoul's criminal world by the following morning with a clarity that required no announcement. The threat was finished. The pressure point was gone. Leo came home that evening with his school bag still on one shoulder. Adaeze sat with him at the kitchen table until past midnight, not saying much, just being in the same room in the way that matters more than any conversation after a hard day. In the weeks that followed, Adrian began making changes. Not small ones. He started restructuring the operation systematically, stepping back from the most dangerous networks, placing trusted people in positions to hold what remained, and engineering his own exit from the empire he had spent 20 years building. Not because he had been defeated. Not because he had run out of power. Because of what Leo had said in that café. Prove it. Over time. That's the only way. Adrian had decided that Leo would not inherit violence. He would not grow up watching his father maintain power through fear and call it a legacy. If he was going to be in his son's life, he was going to be in it as something worth looking up to. One Sunday afternoon, the 3 of them sat together in the apartment. Leo was at the table drawing architectural plans. Adrian sat near the window watching his son work, and his expression held something Adaeze had never expected to see there. Something open. Something that looked like peace. Leo looked up. "I guess I really do have your eyes," he said. Adrian looked at the boy who had confronted him calmly and demanded honesty and waited for proof before offering trust. Then he looked at the woman who had given 15 years of her life to keep that boy alive. He smiled. Not as a mafia boss. As a father.